What is going on, everyone? Welcome back to the Hockey Lab podcast. Coach A here with
Coach Guards.
Coach Ryan Gardner. I know you want to sound more
Oh, I
professional
just thought on the form.
on the forum. And
Sylvie.
what's up, ST? SV, welcome to the pod. This is your second time on, is it not?
I think so.
Yeah, long time listener, second time caller. So, for those that don't know who Sarah is or haven't listened to the first one, shame on you. But Sylvie is our director of nutrition here at Gary Roberts Performance. So anything that goes on that has to do with food, supplementation, etc., it is inside of her wheelhouse and passes through her. Is that accurate? Originally a strength conditioning coach. Sarah actually joined the company before I did. She hired me. So that's the...
Not exactly, but
Hey,
I mean, I was part of the...
you were part of the hiring process. She interviewed me, yeah. So Syl's been here. She's an OG. As the saying goes. But we're talking nutrition. I think if there is one category that we get asked about, it is undoubtedly nutrition. Especially out in the public. Games, events, etc. So we had a whole list of in-season nutrition questions that we pulled together from some of our athletes and kind of chat about that. And then we'll go from there. And then Ryan, I'm sure you have some thoughts and takes just based on where you're at in your life and the kids.
Yeah, nutrition's it's a big one. I know the answer is going to be preparation, but it's so true though. It needs to be in the forefront for these kids and families.
Okay.
Yeah.
Should I just go? What do you think? Just start asking and then we'll go from there?
Some of the most common questions there.
Awesome. Okay. Let's kick it off roundtable style here. What is the number one thing hockey players should focus on for their in-season nutrition?
Definitely hitting their calories. So quantity of food is huge. Obviously, quality, we are expecting them to have good quality calories, but at the same time, the amount is the biggest focus because if they're under fueling, that means they're going to be underperforming. So how do we achieve this? We do have to track our food, maybe just for a short period of time in order to know where they're at right now. And then try to get in that amount and then some on game days, for example, because game days, there's more of an energy output. That means we need to take in more food in order to make up for that. So the number one mistake, I would just say athletes aren't eating enough. They're under fueling and then they're wondering why their performance is suffering.
So if it's a situation between eating something that's suboptimal, call it fast food, quote unquote, or not eating food at all for a few hours.
Want them to eat, and there's always choices you can make.
That's not a gold stamp to just eat fast food all tournament. By the way, everyone, just so we're clear.
No, and we'll talk about preparation, but it really is everything. Like if you are chasing your next meal and you don't know what you're eating on a regular basis, chances are you'll underfuel and then your performance will suffer because you don't know where your calories are coming from. And then also, I mean, we can get into the, specifics of what those calories should be around a game, but in general, eating a well-balanced diet 80% of the time. So eating, carbohydrates, proteins, and fats coming from whole foods. If you stick to that about 80% of the time and you're eating, for a hockey player, typically 4 meals a day plus a couple snacks. I know that sounds like a lot, but typically if you have numbers aside, if you have 4 meals plus a couple high calorie snacks, you'll be fueling properly for that game situation.
Got it. Okay. Fast food. What do you guys have? What were your tournament options when you were a kid? You remember? We had Tim Hortons all day.
God, that's a good question. I think we would eat whatever. Sometimes the hotels would have the food there. Probably pizza.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I mean, I think too, I think the important thing to say is I know a lot of parents are always or I don't know if a lot of parents, but don't eat too much or that's, and then that's probably the wrong thing to say,
Yeah.
I think, even last night we get in the car, it's 9:00, we're driving home and it's the kid's hungry and you're like, okay, I didn't prep well. We threw a protein bar in there and we're driving by Arby's and I'm like, we're home in 30 minutes. Let's just wait to get home and try to get something better. But I think back when I grew up, it was always don't eat too much. Had it not changed a bit because you're always worried about being
too being too full.
being too full or being too heavy or
You want to play hungry, eh?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's a preference. There are athletes that, on that game day specifically, like it's hard for them to eat a lot. And
Right.
so even if like they're getting in, their carbohydrates, which is going to give them that quick energy, they have enough protein, maybe not the protein that they're eating like 1 gram per pound on say a practice day or a recovery day, but they're at least getting carbohydrates that are going to give them energy. There are situations where you don't want to eat
Yeah.
as much. But that means that the next, like your recovery day, you need to make up for those calories.
Right.
And so, that's one big problem that a lot of athletes will run into is like they can't eat a lot, which is totally understandable in a lot of situations where they
Yeah.
can't eat like really large meals on that day. So they're kind of eating smaller portions on a game day. But then that recovery day the next day, because they've just depleted their glycogen, all their carbohydrates, they need to replenish that. They need to, obviously make up for all the tissue damage that just happened during a game or practice or workout. So protein has to be a factor. And then all the recovery nutrients that you need
Yeah.
from fruits and vegetables and fats. So yeah, underfueling is still the biggest problem. So yes, around games, you can definitely, manage that
But
calorie.
then afterwards, you have to catch up.
You have to catch up because otherwise, like if you look at an entire week, you kind of want to look at, as opposed to just like daily calories, like what's going on in that entire week. Some days are going to be high calorie days. Some days might be lower calorie days based on what you have going on.
So based on how much you burn.
Well,
Yeah.
yeah. So I guess like you're saying, just for the listeners, let's say that our target is somewhere around 4,000 calories a day, which
Yeah.
I'd say for our elite players is probably
Pretty
the right
average, yeah.
the right number.
What would, sorry to interrupt, what would a normal kid's calorie intake need to be around in a day?
What's
So a professional athlete.
No.
Like a 13-year-old or a 14-year-old.
Yeah, and
Going
so
through growing
3,000.
3,000.
Depending on how big they are right now and what their goal, like, obviously how heavy they want to be, but
Right.
typically around 3,000 if they're like a 13-year-old. Again, I
You
have
have
to
to
see
see, yeah.
the amount that of food that they're currently eating, and there's a lot of different factors there, but yeah, around 3,000.
Right. So 21,000 calories in a week roughly
Yeah.
is what we're saying. So some days might be 2,200 or 2,300, and then some days might be closer to 3,600.
Yeah.
Just depending on what's
So
going on.
you want to look at the week. It's a better representation of like what's going on based on basically high and low days.
Right. Which I think for adults listening is actually important too. Not that, we spend a lot of time talking about adults, but if you were thinking about,
Excuse me.
if you were thinking about, jinx, fat loss, for example, or weight loss, thinking about it in a weekly cadence as opposed to a daily cadence actually makes a lot of sense.
It does because
The
you're gonna
weekend,
have-
a little fun.
well,
Yeah. The
that-
Friday night.
Yep. Well, pizza.
Yeah. So you want to, look at what the week has in store in terms of energy output, what you have going on, and then also other stressors. Like, do you have late night situations where
Right.
you don't want to have a massive meal at 10 p.m. So maybe you have a shake instead, and then you get up and have a big breakfast.
Right.
So it's all about, again, balancing that out for what you have in that situation for output.
Okay. Well, then what about mistakes around fueling for games specifically? Like, where is do we see?
Fueling for games, as we mentioned, like it really depends on the athlete. Some athletes do need to eat lighter on game days because they just can't stomach the same amount of food. They have sensitive stomachs, which like a lot of athletes do because of the amount of physical stress. That's actually really hard on our digestion. So we want to eat really simple, basic foods on game days. So a lot of the time, like, if they're on a road, like on the road, for example, if they have like, a meal out, they're making choices that aren't normally what they would eat. They're having maybe something that's fried, something with a lot of sauces. So that gets us in trouble for game situations because your body's just not used to it. And it also is something different. So you could have some type of symptoms leading to the game. So typically you want basic carbohydrates, so things like sweet potatoes, oats, rice. Those are really good things to have on a game day, and you want to focus more on those foods because they're going to, be energy producing foods for a game. And then a moderate amount of protein. So you might not be hitting that gram per pound. So, again, it might make them feel too full if they're having a massive steak at lunch. So they might want to have things like chicken and turkey and fish that are, might make them feel a little lighter. Things like Greek yogurt and cottage cheese are great examples. Shakes, things that are going to be easily digestible and that they've had on practice days. You want to limit a lot of fiber. So having things like raw vegetables and hummus might be a great snack on a, practice day, but it's not a great snack going into a game because, again, it's a lot of fiber
Right.
and a lot of those digestive issues might come up.
Right.
High fats as well. So high fat foods, again, our primary goal of a game is obviously energy production. So carbohydrates are going to be the best source for that. We also want to feel a little full. So you're going to want a little bit of protein, moderate.
You mean full and like you're satiated?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then you want a ton of nutrients.
Good word, satiated.
It is a great word. And then you want a lot of nutrients. So things like, dark leafy greens, cooked is always better than raw on game days. So if you can do like cooked spinach or Swiss chard or something like that, it will give you like high iron foods. Get iron. I know you love how I say that because I'm from the East Coast. Iron.
Iron foods. Ask her what the smell is that comes around farms.
No, let's not get into that.
What is it?
Manure?
Manure. I say it funny.
Manure. Keep
All right, keep going.
Oh, now I lost my train of thought.
No, not leafy greens, high iron.
Yeah, you want really nutrient dense foods. So things like berries have a lot of antioxidants in them. So colorful foods that aren't going to, again, have an impact on digestion. So yeah, higher carbohydrate, moderate amount of protein. Hydration is a huge focus. So, leading up to a game, you really want to focus on hydration and having those energy producing foods.
Got it.
I think that's a big one too, is the hydration thing. Like kids don't think about that part at all. They're like, because parents are like, you got a water bottle? And then it's like, yeah, it's in my bag. It's not full. They get in a car, maybe they drive 45 minutes and they don't do anything, right?
They don't have a sip.
They don't have a sip.
Yeah.
So I'm always like, sip, 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 sip a little bit, get some water in you. It's not during the time when you're thirsty, it's before.
Yeah, and you don't want to be chugging water. And this is the mistake a lot of athletes, like they feel full off water because they're chugging it just around game, and it's like you need to be prepped leading up to the game.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's definitely a focus, and that's when you get close to a game, like that's what you're focusing on. You're like right before and during, it's hydration, and maybe you need a snack in between, and that's going to be that high energy. Maybe things like honey or a piece of fruit or energy balls, something that's going to give you high energy in those situations.
What about, and this is a big one I think for kids now that are getting older, they have a break in between certain periods. So some will break between second and third. Is there certain foods? I guess you probably just rhymed them all off, but like stuff that you need to have, like you can have in between periods while you're sitting in the restroom. Like, like people bring bananas. Is that like?
Yeah, fruit is a great option. Fruit is going to be like, you want to think bringing energy you're going to use right away, right? So those little like oat bars or preferably if you can make it like things like honey and maple syrup are great options to put in those because it's going to give you that quick energy, right? So honey packets too, if you just
like those stingers or whatever they're called.
Those are great. And like I said, piece of fruit, dried fruit as well, so those can be great options to have as like that quick energy.
There's a boost for the third.
Yeah,
I think that is worthwhile just having a quick discussion around that. So food is, I'll try and summarize this and tell me if I'm correct, but food is essentially chemical energy, right? So we eat food, it gets broken down, and then we use that energy to create mechanical work, which is the act of actually playing. And so we're talking about carbohydrates, and they've gotten a bad rap in some circles over the last little bit. But carbohydrates are so important because the main compound of carbohydrates is glucose. And when we're talking about producing energy quickly, so you can create energy in two different ways. You can do it oxidatively, which means with oxygen, or non-oxidatively, which means essentially without oxygen. And hockey involves a variety of high-intensity, fast output movements.
Yeah.
And those movements are typically created in a short time window without oxygen.
Yes.
Which means that you don't have as much time to metabolize or use your food to create energy. And so if you have a diet that's too low in carbohydrates, you're not providing your body with enough glucose for it to execute the movement.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is there anything that you would add to that I've missed in terms
Yeah,
of?
and I mean the like hockey, you'll have obviously both energy outputs of your mentions that you are going to get with oxygen, and then a goalie, for example, would be very much an example of both
Yeah.
situations like throughout the whole game. But yeah, I mean the biggest thing that gets that is confusing for athletes with carbohydrates is they hear it can lead to fat gain and all this. With athletes, it's a total different situation because of how they're using it as energy, as you just explained. So for them, especially the nature of the sport, you need carbohydrates and you need a variety of different types of carbohydrates. So the big question is like, oh, sugar is really bad for athletes. Well, it depends. Yes, sugar is in honey and maple syrup
Right.
and like natural sources as well. Sugar's in fruit. Are you going to tell an athlete not to eat fruit? That would probably be pretty damaging to their options in terms of carbohydrate sources.
Right.
So, yes, our, muffins and cakes and all of those things, are those the best performance foods? Not necessarily. There's definitely other options, but in a quick pinch, sometimes we do need these high, quick energy sources of sugar. It just depends on, again, the situation.
And then the other component of that is glucose versus glycogen. So glucose is the free form version, whereas glycogen is the stored version. So for people listening, it's not a 1-to-1 utilization rate. So I don't just have one banana and I immediately utilize all of the available energy inside of that banana, right?
We have to store some in our liver, in our muscle tissue, brain,
And so if I'm not consuming enough leading up, I won't have enough glycogen supply available inside of my muscle to go. So you see this in fight camps a lot because guys go into such a severe caloric restriction to try and make weight. And so fighting is challenging in that regard. So if I need to make weight, I need to bring down my total caloric intake, but I also need to bring down my carbohydrate intake because carbohydrates pull water into the muscle.
carbohydrates.
Exactly.
It's right in the name.
Hydrate pulls water into the muscle, and I don't want that because I need to drop a weight class, right? So I'm trying to remove the water from my body, which is fine. It's part of the sport. But then fighters will try and train too hard in the last week leading up to fights, and they have no fuel to do it.
They have
nothing to store.
Fat muscle.
Exactly.
So they don't actually have, and this is why when you look at things like the keto diet and the carnivore diet, like these popular diets, well, yeah, they're pulling water out of your muscles. So you might look lean and feel lean for a certain amount of time. But when we're talking about athletic performance, and to be honest, like it depends on the situation, how hard those individuals are training off of that type of diet. But for the most part, in any high performance situation, you need the carbohydrates and the storage version of it to be available to you in those sprints, in those situations, like especially any contact sport,
Right.
like your body will feel flat without it, as you know.
And then the other thing you talked about too, which I think is really important, is brain health, right? So the primary fuel source is like your brain wants to work off of either lactate or glucose. Like those are its preferred fuel sources. So you have to give it that fuel.
Yeah.
Otherwise, your decision making is going to suffer as well.
It's lactose cheese.
It's slightly different. Lactate.
Okay, sorry.
Little different. Yeah.
I had to get it in there.
Cheese.
Do a whole podcast on cheese.
Okay, so then there's another term that gets thrown around a lot and I think might create some confusion, and that's energy availability. So what does that actually mean?
So energy, as you just mentioned, like we take in food, it gets stored, and we basically can use it in different forms as mechanical work or energy output. So when we do need to practice and work out and be in a game situation, basically we need to have energy availability for that situation. So that's our food that we have stored that we can now use as energy.
Got it.
And so when we're talking about energy availability, it means, do we have enough food in order to deal with this high intensity work output that we're just about to do? And so a lot of the time, again, you're looking at specifics, but we can get down to some of the mechanical stuff that you just mentioned, the glucose we just talked about, but with protein specifically, it is the satiation, feeling full, but protein does so much more than just, build muscle. It helps with, things like detoxification. It helps with, clearing toxins out of our system. It helps with with gastrointestinal health, so digestion, like you name it, protein's helping. So we do need, and that's why it's essential, essential macronutrients. Our bodies actually need it to survive. So yeah, so we need a certain amount of that availability to deal with the tissue breakdown, to deal with the repair after a game. And then when it comes to micronutrients, so, we talk a lot about the macro, and that's really what's going to provide your body with like the basic foundation. So I always say macronutrients are for aesthetics. So like looking good, we can focus on that. The micronutrients is where you're going to get the performance gains. So that's your
Feeling good.
vitamin C or iron, like your ability to get oxygen to your muscles, like that all comes from your micronutrients within those macronutrients. So micronutrients are really like the magic wands that are going to do the extra work. So this is why we need to get berries and, dark leafy greens and different color from our food along with the macronutrients in order to help with that. So when it comes to an energy availability, we need the carbohydrates, as we just mentioned. We need the protein, and we need the, fat content.
Here we're going on display guard, sorry.
I'm just thinking, I'm hungry.
So
Losing my train of
no, keep going.
My belly is hungry now. All of a sudden, keep going.
So and we need fats and micronutrients in order to help that process. So the available energy from a lot of different sources. So not just our carbohydrates, but all these other processes that are going to, impact how we perform in that situation.
Can you talk about that just briefly again for people, just so they get a clearer picture? Food comes in, glucose, for example, and we use it, but so something has to help glucose move through the body, right? Is what you're saying, like in terms of micronutrients?
Yeah. So like there's a lot of these like systems and processes that we don't think about. I mean, I'll use the example with iron because we were talking about it, but iron helps with oxygen transport to our muscles. So we were just talking about, with oxygen and helping with going longer, faster, harder, and that energy system of oxidation, that's incredibly important to have enough iron. And with iron, you actually need vitamin C for it to work properly.
Got it.
In our system, so help with that oxygen. So vitamin C, obviously we're getting things like broccoli and red peppers and berries and citrus fruit. So you do need to have all those micronutrients in order to help with that. B vitamins are another huge one for athletes. It helps us in the creation of energy. So, we talk just about energy system from, a carbohydrate perspective and how that's important, but you actually need B vitamins and a lot of cofactors. So just helping with that process, you need B6 and B5 to actually help with that conversion to energy, from food to energy.
Got it.
Does that make sense?
Does make sense. So then for parents listening, it might sound like a lot. So maybe Ryan.
Well, I got a question once you guys are
No,
done.
go ahead.
Well, my question is, so obviously when you get to a certain level, you have the availability and the opportunity to have somebody like yourself help with all this stuff. Have you ever seen, the two of you in your past, an athlete that has come to you at a younger age, say maybe at a junior or maybe first year pro, that to you is off the charts, already dialed with their nutrition, like
Connor Bedard.
from a standpoint of that, like
Yeah.
That's in his age. I'm trying to think of a guy.
I'm just saying, like a
his
kid
age.
that's 16 or 17, other than your kids are going to be, because we obviously see.
Well, maybe they might
But I'm
just
saying,
hate us
like,
for it.
do you know what I mean? Like it's people don't think about it, and I almost feel like it comes around at the back end, and they're like, oh, okay, well, this is going to help you even more. But have you ever had an athlete that's come and it's just been so, like you've said, wow, you know how you see an athlete that maybe has lifted or trained and has the motions, and you're like, wow, this kid been taught properly with technique, and now we can add weight to it.
Yeah, I definitely have had. I think there's, nutrition is becoming a lot more, it's a lot more of a focus for young athletes, just because it is sort of the missing piece for a lot of them. So I think a lot of them are interested. It's just that education piece where they're not exactly sure how to
go about it
specifically for them.
Okay.
And I would say a lot of the times, even with those individuals, sometimes it's actually too much when they are so dialed that you actually need to broaden, like you actually need to eat more, or like, there's
Right.
like too much restriction because I heard bread wasn't good. I heard this wasn't good. And everything is different for the athletic population.
Right. So, but if somebody were to come to you that you think is at a good level already, and then you can obviously tweak them, but that would just be somebody that's, trying to do the right things, eating healthy, eating enough.
And
like,
there's so much exactly.
okay.
Like
so it's not like it's not overwhelming where you got to be so picky. It's just got to be we got to hit this. Some of it's really simple too. Also, just eat the right stuff.
Yeah, and I would say the majority of what people need is simple. That doesn't mean it's easy.
Right.
Right. So it's like it's simple concepts. We talked about 80% of the time, if you're eating, doing your best and eating, whole foods and the variety of your macronutrients and getting a lot of different color, you're going to hit a lot of the big
Those things that you need.
Exactly. Like, a lot of the stuff online that's really fancy with sports nutrition is like, what supplements should you take? Well, that will do nothing if they don't have that foundation of eating enough and then just a variety of different foods in those categories.
I think variety from a parent standpoint is the hardest if you don't introduce it at such a young age.
Oh, it's later in life and you're trying to get them to eat it?
Yeah, like, I mean, I take myself, for example, like I didn't eat salad forever. Like, it just never,
it just wasn't a thing.
Wasn't a thing, right? So if you don't have that, like, so you got to introduce this stuff at a younger age to these kids. Like, I have 2 kids. The boys, one eats everything, the other one doesn't, and he's very picky. So, you got to kind of try to get around that somehow, right? So
foundational nutrition, I guess, that was the next topic that I had, but you just kind of covered that.
Yeah,
right?
it is foundational.
Yeah, just
nutrition.
yeah.
So foundational nutrition would be exactly that, like eating real whole foods. We have like a hierarchy, so it's like eat real whole foods first, and so that means different protein sources that we recognize as protein: chicken, fish, cottage cheese, yogurt. Those are recognizable whole food sources, and then carbohydrates, like I mentioned, oats and sweet potatoes and rice and those types of things. And then fats, things like avocados, nuts, and seeds. And then within that too, just like a lot of variety and color.
Right.
So, if we think of it like a performance plate, we want the majority of our plates to be made up of those foods. And then, after that, we can focus on healthy concepts, so like boosting things like gut health and immunity, and that would be the next tier. Then we focus on things like performance nutrition. So once we're a healthy athlete and we're doing the best that we can with those, then we can focus on things that are what to eat pre and post workout, what supplements to take. That's where the performance nutrition can get more dialed, but we don't go there until the basics and the foundational nutrition are there. And then also hydration.
Right.
It's like you need to be drinking enough water. The number one reason that usually people are fatigued during games is because they're dehydrated. So
it's crazy to think that is the reason, but it really is.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
It's actually like, yes, carbohydrates, well, it goes hand in hand as we talked about carbohydrates. So it's like if they're not having enough water and they don't have enough carbohydrates, typically that will be the number one reason that they are fatigued.
And electrolyte balance too inside of that, would you say as well?
Yeah, electrolyte balance for sure. So not having enough sodium, particularly because you're losing sodium primarily through your sweat. So most of your sweat will be sodium. You'll have some magnesium and
potassium.
Chloride and potassium in there as well. But, for the most part, it is sodium that you're losing.
Go ahead, Gertrude.
No, I mean, I was just going to liken the pyramid to anything, really. Like, your foundation has to be good if you want to be able to have the elite skills at the top, right?
Right.
Like, so, like, if you can't skate backwards, probably not going to be a defenseman. Or like, but you know what I mean? Like, if you can't have range of motion, you're not going to be good at squatting.
Exactly.
Just throwing things out.
You're not wrong.
So
I think it's we've been talking about that 4 coactive model a lot around here, like tactical, technical, psychological, physical, and all of that is a health umbrella. So you're so right. If you don't have health, then how can you possibly perform as well, right?
And I think that goes with mental too, right?
Doesn't always mean health,
Yeah.
right? Like think about in certain situations.
It's a great point.
This all the time.
Last week we talked about it at that event, right? Yeah.
Like, you think about professional athletes as these, health specimens. Well, what they have to do in playoffs is not health.
Right.
It's in order to perform in a high stress situation and do that. Yes, we want them to be healthy long term and create these habits, but in those situations, the focus has to be on performance, right? And
Survival.
Survival. That's
Ebbs and
back
flows.
in survival mode. So you might not be, getting the optimal sleep that you need. You might be having to take more supplements and more things to mitigate the amount of stress that you have on your system. So, so that's why if you go into performance as a healthy individual, you're just setting yourself up for that much more success to perform, at your optimal level.
It's important to remember that those athletes that we're talking about are paid to play a game. So
Exactly.
it's your obligation. We're not talking about Yeah, there's ebbs and flows inside of every athletic career, of course, absolutely. But if you are a younger athlete, we want uh, way more of a holistic approach to it. Is that an accurate statement?
Exactly, because as you mentioned, it's something that we ask all the time. Like, are you getting paid to do it? Well, no, you have these other responsibilities, whether it's school or
Which should be number one, school.
Yes,
Yeah.
school for young athletes. And, I always say to everyone that we work with, these skills are going to, and they're really habit building, the nutrition and sleep and recovery. Those skills are going to take you far in any area of your life, whether it's, you're going into college or, whatever path you're chasing or what you want to be good at outside of hockey. It's going to help with. So it's like we want to set you up for life, not just those, hockey situations, because again, you're not getting paid yet. Maybe you will.
Yeah, and you
one
might
day.
never. You might never.
Exactly.
But I mean, I liken it to just live longer, live healthier. We've lost some people, in my life and in the last little while, and you look at them, they played hockey at a high level, or they played sports at a high level, but they didn't take care of themselves like they should have.
Right.
Right. And I don't think any of that was at the forefront, the mental health, the nutritional health, the training health, nothing. So like these athletes, it's great to watch them become, somebody we look up to or somebody we watch on TV, but you don't want to see them 5 years after they're done and depleted and can't move and can't function and
Right.
can't give back,
Yeah.
like, or can't have a family life or can't live healthy. Like, and I think you hit it right on the head. Like, it's going into business, going into anything. Like, you just need
those
everything.
skills,
Yeah.
and that's why, with all clients that we work with, whether it's like what are you performing for, because everyone's performing in some aspect in their life. It just might not be the same physical performance that these athletes that are getting paid to do, but they also want to perform mentally in their areas of life too. So yeah.
That's awesome. We're coming up in like 32-ish minutes here. So, yeah, you got anything that you want? I got one more question here potentially. but-
I don't. I think the biggest thing is, I mean, so I didn't hit on prep, but it helps a lot. I think just if you know what you're trying to do, just be prepared and try to, I think from parent standpoint, you have to sort of lead the way for your kids. You can't be scarfing down burgers and pizzas and wings. Yeah. And telling your kid to have a salad and chicken. Right. Like, and as much as
Show, don't tell.
right. And as much as a parent is trying to do their best for the kids, maybe you should, we should as parents also take into consideration your own health and say, hey, you know what? Like, I know just from our fact, it just helps when you're doing the same stuff and trying to push the bar for your family. Because at the end of the day, it's, I hear a lot of parents from younger kids, well, the nutrition, it doesn't affect them just yet. I'm saying, yeah, but it's you more than anybody that has to.
Does at every level.
Yeah, right.
It certainly does affect.
No, boy, I don't mean it. I mean it does affect the young kids. I've said they can't process some of the information maybe that Syl's telling that can.
I get what you're saying, that it is a funny take because they're young. It doesn't matter, but everyone's
Doesn't matter, but the nutrition sort of. I
I
don't
know
know.
what they're saying.
Yeah.
But everyone's experienced their kid being out of routine and eating like junk food at a party and then just being absolutely miserable to be around.
I mean, we have a 2-year-old.
It was like that on Saturday. Yeah, she just hammered cake and pizza, and then she was miserable to be around.
I see it now, and I think the biggest thing for us as a growing family is not enough. That's when they start
Gotta eat
to
enough
act up.
food?
Yeah,
Yeah.
when they're hungry.
Yeah.
Come home from school, and then they start going at it, and you're like,
Oh, just hangry.
yeah. But no, I meant it more from a standpoint of like learning about it. I'm
Right.
like, you can learn about it,
Yeah.
even if they pick up 2-3 things as a kid: color stuff, good food, lots of sleep, lots of water.
It's a basic.
Right? So when a kid goes to a restaurant, a lot of them are now like, I'll have water or, maybe one iced tea, not 3. And sorry, Coke, right?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's the biggest thing I see as a change. I remember kids ordering Coke, Diet Coke, even when I started playing Diet Coke, like all the time.
Right.
That, like, the pop is not, or in my circle, I don't see it as much anymore. And that was
water.
which is great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like, again, there's timing to everything. Like, what's going to help you perform in those moments? Do you have a game coming up? Like, what's going on? Because the choices will always be there. You can make even if you're at whatever, Tim Hortons, like they have some options you can make that are better than some other options. So yeah, it's just making the decision on what you have going on.
Awesome. Syl, thank you.
Thank you.
Any parting words? Last thoughts?
No, I think we're good.
Okay, we got to get you on more often. It's always
Are
great.
you saving that question for next time then?
Yeah, well, yeah, you did a
save
great
it.
job.
Let's
touching
do
it.
it. Let's save it. Let's
Yeah,
save it.
in the bag for part 2, and I won't interrupt you while you're talking.
What are we saving in our body again? What's that? We're saving it for energy?
Glycogen.
Glycogen.
It's a glycogen question. It's
So
stored.
Stored for later.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks.
Nice work.